You will never have power as a victim, ever. In any situation, if you can ask yourself, what is this doing for me? Why does this keep showing up in my life? And how does it serve me?
Hi everyone, Dhru Purohit here. Question for you. How do you become more likable? Like really likable, not in a fake way, in a real way. How do you have true connection with the people around you? Both the people that you know that you want to be closer to and the people that you've never met before. Well, today's guest, Jennifer Kolari, who's an expert in the field of mirror neurons and the practical application of them, is going to be teaching us a simple technique that all of us can use to be more connected authentically to the people in our lives, which means we'll be more likable. It's a fascinating conversation. Stay tuned. I want to start off with a big picture question that'll set the stage for what we're going to be talking about today. Why do so many people have a hard time truly connecting with the people in their life? I'm talking about in relationship, there's disconnection. In friendships, there can be a lot of frenemy situations. In work, butting of heads, whether it's with you and your superior, you and people that report to you, you and your colleagues that are there. Why is this big challenge happening for so many people in so many different areas of life?
It's a really good question. And I think there's the simplest answer is fear, right? It's fear. When you're afraid, when you're not aligned, when you're overthinking things, you're going to disconnect. That's how it works. So if you meet someone who is prickly or edgy or defensive, that person, it's fear. They're afraid. They're in pain on some level. And so dealing with that and knowing yourself, and the most important relationship in the world is the relationship between you and you. When you are sorted out yourself, everything else falls into place.
Do you think that most people know that they're afraid or that fear is driving this?
Absolutely not. No, most people do not. Really, when you think about human emotions, there's really only two. There's love, and I know it sounds corny, but there's love and there's fear. So anger and jealousy and bitterness and, gossip and all of those things, stealing, lying, all of it comes from being afraid. You're afraid you don't have enough. You're coming from a place of scarcity. You worry that you're not enough. And that gets in the way. And those become patterns that get laid down in the brain. The neural pathways in the brain then form themselves around that. And the brain likes to do things that are the same, likes things that are familiar. And the truth is we're the star of our own movie. Everyone else is the secondary character, right? So we're used to seeing things from our own perspective. And what really gives you strength in this world and what really gives you closeness is A, when you're in a good place with yourself, which is not so easy, but it's possible. And two, when you just feel like you don't have anything to prove to anyone, right? You're experiencing life. You become a student rather than a victim in life. And that's huge.
Why do so many people feel, or whether they realize it or not, or why does it sometimes feel that people have something to prove? Like, where does that come from, right? As somebody who works with both parents and kids and families, where does the feeling and the need to prove ourselves to other people from?
So I'll give you the kind of big answer to this, because the brain itself does not have the capacity to store long-term memories until about the age of 7 or 8. Prior to the age of 7 or 8, whatever happens to you, it's like an emotional tattoo. It gets burnt into the limbic brain. So you've got your frontal lobe that regulates and organizes and prioritizes and motivates and shifts attention and takes perspective, all those really important higher order things. Then there's the midbrain, and that part of the brain's job is to freak out. Am I safe? Am I in danger? It's the security system in the brain. So that part of the brain lights up very, very easily. And before the age of 7, all the things that happen to us. So what's your first memory that you can, like, how old were you?
Probably my first memory was right around 6 or 7 that I can really strongly remember.
Yep. Prior to that, there might be one thing, but it might be something scary or something really exciting. But most of the time we can't find memories because the capacity wasn't there to build them.
Yeah, like at the age of 5, I think I have a memory of me like lying in my parents' like apartment when we first moved to the States. And I just remember the carpet was green, but not too much else.
It'll be fragmented, right? So 7 or 8 is when we actually start to get a sense of the world and we get long-term memories and then we can compare them to each other. So prior to that, those are called implicit memories. So whatever happened to us prior to, and there are good things that happen to us prior to the age of 7, and there's, all kinds of things that happen to us prior to the age of 7. And that actually is what the brain is built upon. So if you think about it this way, we're adults walking around with programming that was installed prior to the age of 7, right? So everything that happens to us, every interaction, every failure, every success goes back to that early programming. But the good news is it's programming. You can update the program. You don't have to run on this outdated programming, right? So it's usually there. That it could be our birth order. It could be something traumatic that happened in our family. Our parents could have gone through a divorce. There could have been financial things happening. There could have been an accident, could have all kinds of things. That early fear or trauma then gets built into the brain system. Okay, life can be this way, be ready, and build itself around that. So for example, I know my implicit memory. So when I was little, I was only about 2. My brother passed away, and I don't remember him because he was a baby. But I do remember my parents being at the hospital a lot and just feeling like there was no one there. And my parents did the best they could. What could they do? They had a baby that was very ill. And I know that memory caused me to like, yeah, da-da-da, here I am, like, see me, I'm here. And so a lot of what I ended up, how I ended up operating the world was based on that. Now, that's not a good thing or a bad thing. It can be both, right? So it is why I love the job that I do and why I care so deeply about people and why I learned to be seen and heard. These are very important things. But it did come from that implicit memory. So I'll give you an example of how I remember being with a client and a phone call had come in just before then, and it was from a fairly prominent psychiatrist. And immediately when I got this call, I started to panic. I've done something wrong. I don't know what's going on. Why is he calling me? There must be some reason for this. And my brain kind of took off. Now, in my whole life, that's never happened. But this is where my brain went. Ended up phoning the psychiatrist back. How are you? Oh, thank God you answered me. I really need your help. I need you to see this family, which of course is what it was. But my implicit memory was something's wrong. Right?
Something's wrong and
I've made a mistake.
It's my fault.
And maybe it's my fault. Yes, exactly. So once you're aware of what that implicit memory is, and in arguments with people, with any interaction that you have with anyone, your implicit memories are going to come through. You basically have the same argument with everybody all the time. It just taps into where you feel like you've been abandoned, where you're not enough, where people don't recognize you. There's sort of common beliefs that people have. I'm not enough is a big one, and that can come from many, many different things. But being aware of how that program operates in the background is important because you can just, in a loving way to yourself, notice, oh, there's the program. It's running. I don't have to obey that program. I don't have to believe that program. And then you go to the work of really trying to become enough for yourself rather than other people. And that's a challenge, but it's important.
Yeah. And also like catching when that program is running the show and we're not aware of it. Yeah. But then also there's gifts that come with that program, just like you were saying.
Yes, absolutely.
And we'll chat more about that in a second. But I want to come back to the opening question that we had. Mm-hmm. Why do people have such a hard time connecting? Let's talk about something else. You see families, you work with families. What do you lose when you cannot connect with people? What is lost?
That's a good question. Yeah.
And it could be in different categories of life, right? Mm-hmm. Tell us what you've seen with relationships, people in their jobs. When you regularly cannot be connected to people, which in turn is also the opportunity for them to be connected to you, you to be connected with them. What's the consequence in life?
So there are big consequences. We're human. We're social beings, right? You're here. I'm here. We're all here because someone loved us enough, right? Someone cared about us. Someone looked after us. Someone nurtured us in some way to get us here. So human connection is actually incredibly important to mental health and physical health, really, ultimately. And I think what you lose is a sense of happiness and peace. When you're constantly in a place of fear, this person's getting ahead of me, I'm not enough, why did that person get a raise? How come nobody noticed that I did this? When you're constantly in that state, the midbrain can't tell the difference between something really terrifying that's happening and something sort of milder that's causing us stress is happening. It operates the same way. So cortisol flies through your body. Adrenaline is surging through your body. And then you end up reacting to everybody in your life instead of responding to everybody in your life. And you miss opportunities for people to love you and care about you and ask if you're okay. And you lose the opportunity for growth. It really honestly comes down to learning how to emotionally regulate, which is a huge gift. And if you're a parent, it's a huge gift to show your children that you can do. It's not taught anywhere. In our culture in particular, we teach people to run away from their emotions. If you're feeling sad, if you're feeling angry, if you're feeling whatever, drink something, smoke something, grab your phone, watch something, buy something, get away from it. And those emotions, which I won't even call negative emotions, are like indicators. They're like your GPS system, right? So those what we call negative emotions will tell us when, the rumble strip on the edge of the highway.
Yeah.
The negative emotions will shake you like, ugh. And really what it's telling you is I'm off the road. I'm not being my best self. I'm operating from fear, not love. I'm in a place where I don't like who I'm being in this moment. And I'm just operating from a place of fear. And I'm defending myself and I'm getting scared. So learning how to feel your emotions, truly feel your emotions, is actually what's freeing. So if we are operating by reacting to each other all the time, people will walk around feeling hurt, not listened to, ignored, looked over, and you're constantly in a state of pain that you don't need to be in.
Yeah, it's funny because it's like you feel unsafe, and let's say as the person who has a hard time connecting with people, and that's not just a soft skill. It's like it actually impacts your income, it impacts your opportunities, it impacts people wanting to get a chance to do business with you or explore new ventures. Like it's not that soft skills alone are not important, but for anybody that's listening, that's like, well, how does this relate to other aspects of life? This relates to everything. And so if you're the individual that's in pain, and because you're in pain, you're in fear, and it's really the absence of connection really allows that fear to come up. Like there's not a neutral opportunity. It's not like a fear, a neutral, and then a connection on the other side. It's either going to be one or it's going to be the other. Yeah. So when you're in that fear mode and you're not feeling safe yourself, you are seeing everybody else as a threat, and it's just going to continue that cycle. Yeah. We tend to create the situations in our life that we're already expecting. If we expect the worst in our friends, we expect the worst in other people, we expect our brother or sister or parent or kid, and that they're not going to show up, they're not going to have our back, whatever it might be. We tend to create that. We treat them a certain way, and then they treat us a certain way back, and then the cycle of pain continues.
That's right. And to your point, whatever you're tagging, whatever you think is going to happen in the world, there's the reticular activation system in the brain, which everyone should know about. It's basically a neural net. There's so much happening around you, sounds, sights, there's data and information flying into the brain all the time. You're commissioning and decommissioning cells, you're digesting food, your blood is pumping, there's so much happening. So the neural net actually takes this thin little band of what you've considered important and then pulls from reality those things. It's like how you tag things on Google, right? So if you wake up in the morning and, I have to see my coworker today, and I know she's just going to do this, or I know my husband's going to do that. Now it's tagged. So it's pulled into your awareness. Then your brain, you go out into your day, and guess what you're going to see? That's because you've tagged it, right? You're looking for it. And that's a really important thing for people to understand, because what you focus on shows up in your life. Truly, that's how it works. So it's funny, I put this white shirt on today, and I was thinking to myself, this shirt is going to look just as beautiful and just as clean when I put it away tonight. And here's why I do that. If I put this shirt on, I'm like, I'm for sure going to spill something out. There's no way this shirt is going to look like this, at the end of the day. What does my subconscious mind hear? White shirt, dirt, right? It makes that coupling. It doesn't understand if you want it or don't want it. I've just tagged that thing. So now what's going to happen is my subconscious wants to do what it thinks I want it to do. I might squeeze through a smaller space than I would have normally. I might choose a messy drink. I might choose a lunch that's a little messier. The subconscious mind is always trying to do what we think it wants us to do. That increases the chance that I'll have a splotch on this shirt, right? So the subconscious mind, think about it this way. It's like the conscious mind is like a little mouse and the subconscious mind is a giant elephant, right? And you're trying to steer this amazingly powerful part of your brain around with these narrow conscious beliefs that we have that have been given to us from our families, our culture, our community, our country, our religion, whatever it is, and also from those implicit memories that I was talking about. So a simple thing like, I'm going to go to work today and I'm going to look for things that my boss does or my spouse does that are positive. I'm going to look for some things they do that actually aren't that bad. Because the truth is, they probably do a bunch of things that aren't that bad. But your brain only pulls from what it sees and what it notices from the data that day, the things that it thought you were looking for. When they weren't nice, when they let you down, when they stole your idea, when they whatever. Does that make sense?
Absolutely does. So question for you on that note, you shared about, your younger brother passing away and very sorry to hear about that. You talked about it before too, but just want to acknowledge it. And the stress that that did bring to your family.
Of course. And
naturally, as your parents were so focused on that, the feeling of not maybe being seen or had attention been placed on. And that could have been one of, the way that I've understood is that there could be a couple. There could be a couple sort of implicit sort of stories, things that are there that sort of define us from a young age. What is an example of negative in the sense that it wasn't maybe giving you what you needed at the time? When you were growing up, what was a negative pattern that came from that? Right?
So, yeah, that's a good
pattern
question.
that you weren't aware of.
Yeah.
That maybe was running the show.
Yeah. Probably I wasn't going to be seen, that I had to go that extra mile to be accepted or appreciated or loved. A lot of people have this, like, people pleaser, right? I can't say no.
Were you a people pleaser growing up?
100%. Yes.
And give us a story or an example of something in your life, with your friends. It could be in high school, middle school, something, you not speaking up.
All of those things. Being
with a shitty boyfriend too long.
All of those things. And the truth is, a simple example would be saying yes to too many things. Sure, I'll come. Oh, this is happening. And saying yes to too many things. And then being like, well, what do I do now? Right? How do I say no to people? So saying no is actually a really common theme when people are people pleasers. And
I think a lot of people can relate to that. We've done a few episodes on people pleasing.
Yes.
Walk us through because I know how much people can relate to this. I am in People Pleasing Recoveries Anonymous.
I love it.
Take us through the bodily sensations that you feel.
Good question.
Right?
Yes.
Take us through the bodily sensations you feel, or the tension or other stuff, because it actually is real-time stress that you're navigating. One part of you is going one direction and another part of you is going in another. So walk us through what it's like for you.
Yes. Okay. So the gut is really where you're going to feel it, right? Some people feel it in their chest. There's almost this feeling of a sinking, like a kind of a feeling in your body. And almost everything kind of drains into that sensation. I have kids that I work with that call it the burn. So it almost feels like this hot feeling that just goes through you. So there's a part of you that doesn't want to do this thing, and there's another part of you that wants to do it, or you're not going to please that person. That feeling, which is interesting, this is how we have to sort of understand how our feelings are information, right? It's information. So that feeling is telling us, usually, I'm going to, how can I word this? I'm not going to do something that's right for me. So when you say yes to something, somebody says, oh, can you work this shift for me? And you're like, sure, yeah, I'll work that shift for you. But everything in your body is going, do that, right? Then you're left with this feeling in your gut, this heavy kind of almost feeling of like sickness a little bit. And then it sits in you and then you stew about it. How am I going to get out of this? And what am I going to do? And then you drag yourself to this thing that you don't want to do with this really heavy feeling. That feeling is your indicator. When you feel that way, you're ripping yourself off. That's the best way that I can explain it. Your best self and what your alignment is with what's good for you and what you need to be doing is off in that moment. And that feeling is your indicator. The only way that feeling is going to go away is if you say, thank you so much for thinking of me, or I appreciate you asking. I love you. I really do. But I actually can't take your shift today. Like, it's just this confidence of knowing they'll figure it out. And then what happens to that feeling? It's gone. It lifts. It goes away. So learning to use these emotions as your GPS system, right?
You know what's really interesting about that is that the last time you were on, we were talking about kids and anxiety, right? And there's been so much attention on anxiety, and we talked about it both positively and let's just use the word negatively.
Yeah.
But a lot of times people feel the sensation of anxiousness, which can mean a lot of different things to people.
Sure.
But instead of seeing it as a smoke detector, like, hey, look, something's going off. It's, I am
this is the thing.
Anxious.
Yes.
Right? I am anxious. And now I've identified with being anxious instead of, hey, I'm having feelings of anxiety. What is my anxiousness trying to show me?
Yes.
Where have I crossed my own boundary?
Yes.
Where have I not paid attention to me? And interestingly enough, I've noticed that, to add another layer, is that when you cross your own boundaries, and a lot of times it's, it can be a situation, an environment. You grew up, you didn't feel like you had a voice. People put you in a position where, you couldn't fight for the things that you wanted to do. You were too young. You didn't know. Like, there's so many factors that play into it. But when you continue to cross your own boundaries, the only thing that's left is really sort of everybody else's to blame. And not that other people didn't have a part in it.
Yep.
But you are stuck in blame, which increases this distance and this ability not to connect with other people.
Absolutely. And then
you just don't trust people.
Yes. And then you're feeling lonely and you're feeling detached. I want to go back to one thing that we're talking about with the feelings. And I want people to understand there's such a difference between being nice and being kind. Those are two completely different things. Being nice can be toxic. Oh, sure. Oh, yeah, I'll do it. That's when you get that feeling in your stomach, right? Nice is not such a good thing. Kind is a great thing. Kind is, hey, I love you. Thank you so much for thinking of me, but I'm actually busy tomorrow night. I hope you have a good time, right? Going somewhere and resenting it, doing something for someone and being angry about it isn't even a nice thing to do for them, right? We also teach people how to treat us. It's not their responsibility to figure out our boundaries. It's our responsibility to set those boundaries, because people are the star of their own movie, and not because they're horrible and selfish and nasty, but they'll keep taking because we often give a mixed message. Sure. But inside we're thinking, oh, you gotta be kidding me. I don't want to do it. Right. So thinking about that difference between nice and kind is actually a really important thing to understand when you operate in the world. Because if you're nice, you'll end up I'm not saying don't be nice, but when it's nice for the sake of saving something because you're afraid, because you don't want to lose a friendship, because you don't want to let someone down, that's the wrong reason. Now you're operating from fear, right? When you're operating from love, hey, I love you and I know you can do it. So this is incredibly important in parenting.
It's almost like nice is meaningless, right?
Yeah.
It's just like if somebody said, hey, you're fast. Okay, great. I understand that you can run fast when you need to run fast. But if you said like, my definition of me being an effective person is I'm fast at everything. So I'll do this interview fast. I'll do that. Like, nice is ambiguous. It doesn't actually mean necessarily anything. It's really the kindness that we're looking for.
That's a much more powerful word. That's what you want to shoot for. Because sometimes you have to do things that don't seem that nice in order to be kind, right? That comes up in work all the time. If you're managing people, if you're leading people, it comes up in parenting all the time. It comes up in friendships. It certainly comes up in marriages. Right. So, but the key thing is really aligning with that feeling of what actually feels right in the moment. Am I operating from love or am I operating from fear? So if I'm operating from love, I would say, of course, you know what, I'm really tired, but I can see you're having a really hard time. I'll take that shift for you. But you do that, but the feeling's not there. That yucky feeling isn't there because you're doing it to be kind. You're doing it because you really want to help that person in that moment of need. They need you. And that's very different from doing it a bunch of times or feeling like you're being taken advantage of or really having something else that you need to do for yourself and you're putting that aside to please that person. So it really comes back to what we were just talking about. A smoke detector, I love that. Use your emotions as an alarm system that's telling you if you're on the road or off the road. Are you in alignment with yourself or are you out of alignment? I call it, the compass facing north.
You said something really important earlier. You said, we teach other people how to treat us.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite quotes by this coach to like Silicon Valley executives and stuff, founders, his name is Jerry Corona. He says, it's important to ask yourself, where have I been complicit in the creation of situations that I say that I don't want in my life? Doesn't mean that you're 100% responsible. Doesn't mean that you were the full cause of it. But where have you been complicit? What are areas that you see often where people are teaching others on how to treat them that they have no clue, that is setting up friction in their life, right? Like, let's talk about parent-kid dynamics, because this is something that you have a whole model for. We're going to talk about that in a second. You have a whole team. Your daughter's here with us today.
Yes.
You have a whole books, coaching, everything. And that's like your world. But the beautiful thing is, just like our first interview, so much of these dynamics that you can so clearly see with parents and kids apply to every other relationship in life. So let's talk about the parent-child dynamic. What's an example of something that parents may not be realizing, that they're, in them interacting with a child in a particular way, they're teaching their kid how to treat them?
Honestly, the best example that comes to mind is overfunctioning for your child.
Talk about that.
So doing things for your child that they can do for themselves, right? And overfunctioning, helping them too much with homework, letting them off on chores. And again, it comes back to the same thing. It comes back to parenting from a place of fear. I'm afraid my child's going to be upset. I'm afraid my child's going to have a fit. I'm afraid my child is going to feel pain from this thing that I want them to do that I know is good for them. And so what happens is, kids are smart. They can figure out really easily and very quickly. And I don't mean maliciously, but if mom or dad are going to overfunction and they're going to worry more than the kid is about homework or whatever it is that they have to do, they're not going to worry about it. Why would I? I'll listen when I have to listen. And so what happens is, parents, and this happens to all parents, but I would say maybe a little bit more for moms, is they end up completely exhausted and doing the nice, kind thing, right? Nobody appreciates me. No one ever thanks me. Everyone just nobody realizes how much I do around here. And part of that is you are overfunctioning for everyone. You're teaching people how to treat you, right? If you actually say to your child, I love you, and you know what? I love you enough for you to be mad at me. You're going to do that job for yourself. You're going to be the one that does what you need to do. You're going to finish that homework because I believe in you and I know you can do it. That's the kindness, right? That's the operating from a place of love, because you love them enough to know that they can do it. And the hardest thing about being a parent is, if you don't teach your child these really important lessons, life will. Life is a much harsher teacher, right?
And if you learn that lesson for the first time when you're 18 years old or 19-year-old and you're in college, and you think that you are the center of the universe and everybody told you your whole life that you were amazing and everything was easy for you, then you get to college or the real world and everybody's just as smart. There's 10,000 more people that are way smarter than you or prettier than you or successful in some aspect. And you have a major meltdown. You have a major meltdown.
In fact, and I don't have the stats offhand, but it used to be 25% of boys, I think, in first year university just fell apart, like dropped out, fell apart. I think it's even higher now. It's very common for students to just not be ready because they've been tutored and driven and helped, and parents have helped them do the homework, and cheating is rampant right now, and some parents are helping their kids cheat. Where does this end? So you're absolutely right. And kids need that neurological hardware to learn how to do that stuff, right? To learn how to take care of themselves, to handle big emotions, to handle hard things without parents always rescuing them. And I'm not saying never rescue them. Of course, there are times you have to look out for your child and you have to fight for them and you have to be an advocate for them. But don't be doing that so much that they don't develop the neurological hardware to do it for themselves, right? And that's a really important part. You're literally the architect of your child's brain. And if you smooth out every bump in the road and you smooth out every challenge and you smooth out every contour in their life, exactly like you say, life's going to get in there one way or another. They're going to get broken up with. They're not going to make a team. They're going to fall apart when they get to university and they're not going to have the understanding. They're not going to have the neurological hardware to help support them through that, right?
Because everybody has things that don't work out in their life. Everybody has things that they wanted to accomplish something. It didn't happen the way they wanted to. We all go through that. And that's part of actually the road to success. And then there's those that feel that like they go through it. And then can you know that you'll be okay on the other side? Versus the person that says, this bad thing happened. I'm never going to be the same on the other side. Yeah. I'm not going to be okay. I'm not going to make it through this.
Yeah.
Why is it, actually, let me ask you a different question. For those that also are stuck in people pleasing or catch themselves in people pleasing, as someone who knows that that's their background and that your early life shaped this, I'm sure there are still some times where you might cross your boundaries, even if it's a little bit. How do you reset?
So how do I reset? So the part of it that we talked about, because I work really hard myself, not just with my clients and with the kids that I work with, but I work hard myself to use my own emotions as my GPS system. I now recognize if I'm off, if I'm feeling a certain way in my body, I am basically out of alignment with my best self, right? Which with my higher self, with the part of me that knows what's right. Were you going to ask a question?
Oh, no, I was going to say, because you know that lack of equilibrium means something's off. I mean, some people are used to it.
Yeah.
But if it's there, something's off.
Yes. And what we often do is we think the something off is that person's fault or this person's fault. Or we start the blame thing that you were talking about. But if you can literally just look at your emotions and go, something's off, what is it? Right. And the biggest thing that I do is I try to always make sure I'm not sitting in the place of being a victim. And if I am there, I'm not there too long. That I switch as quickly as I can into being a learner. Right. So when this thing has happened and I'm off, then I literally say to myself, okay, what did I miss? What's my body telling me? What is this information that I'm missing? What's the information in these feelings that I'm feeling? And what's my lesson? What do I need to learn? What am I missing? What do I need to learn from this situation? And does this situation match other situations I've been in before? Because you will continue to get the same lessons if you don't figure it out. You don't get to skip a grade. Like, you eventually have to figure it out, which is why we see patterns over and over and over again in our lives showing up in different ways with different people. You can hate your job and hate your colleagues and hate your boss and switch jobs. And guess what? 6 months later, it looks the same.
Yeah, there's like that classic sort of meme on Instagram of like, you know, fire the toxic people that are in your life. Okay, that might be one layer to it. There might be people that are genuinely belligerent in your life or other stuff, things like that. You know, we wouldn't wish that upon anybody, but that sometimes could be there. And then the other part is that sort of gray area, which is, okay, there might be somebody that's reflecting behavior back, or it maybe is negative or is something, but is there a pattern or a way that you've been complicit that is kind of keeping that alive?
It is. Yeah.
Is there hypocrisy in your own area? Have you been saying yes to too many things because you're afraid of losing their friendship? Have you been, you know, any kind of dynamic that's there? And that's harder to catch. It's harder to look internal, but it's actually the only thing that really gets you to the root of the issue.
It is. And it's the only thing that eventually helps you figure out that lesson so you don't get the same lesson the next time. Or if you do, you have a whole set of tools and you know how to deal with it, right? And it's a very fine line between blaming yourself for your problems and empowering yourself to fix the problem and not have the problem again. And that's really where you have power. You will never have power as a victim, ever. In any situation, if you can ask yourself, what do I need to learn? What part of this do I need to own? What part of this is my pattern? And also ask your question, how does it serve me? Like, what is this doing for me? Why does this keep showing up in my life? And how does it serve me? And sometimes just asking that question can help that lens pan back so that you can see the situation in a whole new way.
You know, you were so open and vulnerable about your life growing up and some of the experiences that you had. But this time in the past times we talked, curious that when you became aware of this pattern, how did that change your own dynamic with your parents?
Oh, it changed everything, honestly. It really did. And so in a few different ways. I think first, recognizing myself that was a pattern that kept showing up with teachers, friends, you know, all over in any area of my life, gave me some power to think, oh, I can actually do something to change this. And it allowed me, and this is a really important thing when it comes to parenting. And I'm very lucky because I had really, my mother passed away a couple of years ago, but my dad still lives with me, 88 years old. He's awesome. And I'm very grateful for my relationship with him. But when you can get to a place where you realize no matter how, even if you had parents that were just awful, if you can get to a place where you realize they were afraid, they were in pain, and they did the best they could with what they had, you're already not a victim, right? So, and this is where empathy comes in. This is where compassion comes in. This is very challenging because a lot of us are very connected to our stories. We should talk about storytelling. We tell stories all the time about our lives, and we're absolutely invested in that story. And we see the world through that story. We don't like to change that story, but you don't have to lug this story around all the time. And what people don't understand is human memories aren't even that reliable. They're not. So basically, this is how memory works. You remember something. You then pack it away in your brain, but it actually splatters all around your brain. It goes to the olfactory center, to the visual center, the auditory. It literally gets separated into a million different pieces and put away in your brain in different compartments. When you remember something, it gets reassembled. But it gets reassembled with the feeling that you're feeling at the time that you remember it. This is what PTSD is, right? This is what phobias are. So every time you recall something, every time you tell that story again and again and again, you're adding layers and layers of emotion and fear to it. So we have to kind of own our memories. And I'm not saying don't trust your memories, but watch when you're telling the story all the time. And you're not your story. You're the storyteller, right? And that's a really important difference. So for me, it allowed me to just understand and actually feel true empathy for my parents. I can't imagine what they went through, losing a child. I mean, that's a terrible thing. And he was very ill. And it was he was born with spina bifida, actually. And when he was born, the doctor said to my mother, "Oh, we're just going to take him and feed him sugar water. He won't make it."
Wow.
And my mother said, "Absolutely not. That baby is coming home with me." And he was very, very, very ill. And they kept him at home for a very long time, tending for this beautiful little soul, doing everything they could to help him. And it allowed me to see how beautiful is that. And I got a whole life. My brother didn't. Right. And I'll always be grateful for my parents for everything they did for both of us and for my sister as well. So when you can shift that to see that people are always trying to do the best they can, it won't always look like it. And there are people who are evil, I'm sure, but most people are in pain. Right. So even if it's somebody at work or if it's your spouse or your partner and they're being horrible to you and all of your own programs start coming back up. Oh, here we go again. Right. If you can literally take a minute and in your head think to yourself, don't say this out loud because you'll upset the other person. It won't work. But in your head, you're repeating, "I'm sorry you're in so much pain. I'm sorry you're hurting this much. And this is the only way that you can think of to deal with it." Just say that over and over and over again while the person's going, and they're doing that. And this is what you're saying in your head. And watch what happens. It's incredible because the micro expressions on your face change. Your shoulders change. Everything about your energy changes. And watch what happens to that person who's going, you haven't said a word. You're just thinking in your head these beautiful empathic thoughts. I guarantee you, anyone who's listening, try this. The other person within a few minutes will just, they'll stop because they're not riffing off of what they're doing, right? It's a dance that we do, especially in long-term friendships and marriages and, kids and parents. We do this dance and we're just used to the dance. Same, different fight. Who left the garage door open? Who didn't put the dishes in the dish? But it's the same fight. You don't appreciate me. I'm not enough. Right? Over and over.
You mentioned empathy and compassion, and those two are like two primary things that enable connection.
Yes.
And a lot of people talk about them. They talk about the importance, or will say, try to build more compassion, try to grow empathy. But really, what I so much love about your work is that your technique, the CALM technique, is actually a formula for growing it. It's not just like, hey,
do it.
Go be peaceful. Okay. Right. How does that happen?
Yeah.
Instead of like, hey, here's a technique for your breath or this or meditation that is actually, if you do it and you practice it enough, that creates the environment of peace around you. It's very difficult to just go tell people to go and be something.
Of course. Absolutely.
It's very difficult to tell people, just go be empathetic. Just go be compassionate. And by
Yep.
the way, that'll pay off in the long term and people will like you more.
Yep.
And they'll want to do stuff with you that
Yeah.
includes your kids and your partner and other stuff. And you'll
Yeah.
earn trust,
Yeah.
mutual trust on both sides. So this is a perfect place to break down the calm technique and the calm method. And maybe you start off with just a little bit of background on it.
Sure. So this is now 30 years ago. I started working after I finished my undergraduate degree in psychology. I wanted to get some real experience within the real world. And I went out to work in this group home for street kids. So these are kids who were really, it was sex trafficking. They were working on the streets of Toronto. They had what are called Romeo pimps. So these boys or men who would pretend to love them and reel them in and get their trust and then send them out to work. So by the time they came to this receiving home, they were traumatized and they'd all been sexually abused and physically abused. They'd been through really terrible things. They were tough. They were scary. I had no idea what I was doing. I was green as the grass. I was so out of my element. And, we were trained to be very military in this group home. I don't know if group homes still run this way, but this one certainly did. And it was, don't turn your back on these kids and don't be too nice to them. And if give an inch, take a mile. If you let them away with anything, they'll be all over you. And that was just overwhelming to me because I saw some of them were 11 years old, by the way. They were 11 to 16 in this group home. And at night, when it was time to put them to bed, and the teddy bears came out and the makeup came off and the jammies came on, they turned back into babies, like children who'd been through terrible things. And so I did not listen to anything I was told not to do. And I spent quite a bit of time with them during the bedtime routine. So I would rub their backs and I would sing them lullabies and I'd tell them bedtime stories and they would melt. I can't even explain to you how powerful this was, how layers of defensiveness and prickliness just kind of melted away. And sometimes they would cry, sometimes I would cry. And it was really powerful. And I noticed the next day when it was time for me to get those kids to do the things they needed to do in the house, they were much more likely to do it for me. So it had a direct impact on trust and compliance. And that was pretty powerful. And the other staff were like, oh, she's a bleeding heart. They're going to walk all over her. She's going to see this is going to backfire. It's not going to work. It didn't backfire. And there was this wonderful sense of just trust and connection with these kids who truly had no reason to trust anybody. I'll be honest with you. No, really. And I remember one little girl, actually, she was really tough. She was quite behavioral. She'd only been there a short time. She was actually leaving. She was going off with her social worker to go to another group home. And she got to the end of the sidewalk and she was about to get in the car and she paused for a second. I was standing on the porch with a few other staff members and she came running back up the sidewalk and put her hands on my cheeks and said, I just want to remember this face, the face of someone who actually cared about me. So that moment, as profound as it was, I'm sure, for her, was so profound for me. It was this human, amazing connection where there was just pure love there, and she hadn't felt that before. And I adored her, and I cried my eyes out as she left. But I knew in that moment, this will be my work. This is what I want to bring, and I want to learn everything about it. I want to understand how to find this in all of us. It's the language of love. We all speak it. There's nobody who doesn't. It's powerful. We all know how to do it. So at the beginning, when you were talking about finding compassion and finding empathy, I like to think of it more as like, let it flow. You don't have to find it.
Allow it.
Allow it. It's in us. Let it flow through you, right? You don't have to look for it and generate it. It's there. Just let it in.
It's there. It's only a question of, is there a blockage in the way?
Exactly. So that's how it started. And I went, on in my work, I went back and did, postgraduate work and really started to form the idea of how do I help people allow this empathy and not only just allow it, but understand how profoundly important it is to human health and human mental health, right? So because we are social beings, we only feel good when we're good with our people. I mean, how do you feel if you've had an argument with someone you love, right? You're just off. No matter how you try not to be, you're just off, right? So, and people who seem so unlovable, right? So hardened or so angry or so bitter that you just think, oh, that person's horrible. That's the moment actually to allow compassion. What has happened to that person? What happened to them this morning? What else is going on in their lives? Who has hurt them? Where have they suffered? Where have they felt pain? Because what you see back is pain. It's fear and it's pain, right? So it takes bravery, it takes strength, it takes courage to be compassionate and empathic when it's so much easier to just get mad and, oh, that person's an idiot, and treat them the way that they just treated you. But as we'll dive into, the more you're able to do this, your own life changes. Like dramatically changes. The interactions that you have with people change. The conflicts start to diminish or or you recover so much faster from them, and they don't wound you as much. And you just are able to feel good about how you're operating in the world.
So what's interesting about that time is that without even really knowing what you were doing, there were some key pillars that were kind of repeatedly being hit in those just authentic interactions that you were having in this group home. And I've heard you share on other podcasts, those same pillars that were there, they would start showing up in your other lives, in your other life.
Yes.
And interactions with other people. Talk about some of what those key pillars are and how that led to the technique that you call the calm technique.
Well, maybe I'll start with that. Maybe I'll explain what the calm technique is, and then we can pull in the pillars. So it's actually a technique called mirroring, which is part of so self-psychology is a model of therapy, and it's not particularly well known. I don't know why. I wish the whole world knew about it, 'cause it's amazing. Heinz Kohut is the founder. It was, and he was years and years ahead of his time, where he just deeply understood that attunement, deeply connecting to the emotion behind what someone is bringing to you. And when you align that, when you're able to attune with that, literally, it's almost like being on the same radio station, right? That incredible things happen. Emotional regulation starts to happen. When you're deeply understood, you're then able to make your own alignment. And children and people get stronger from the inside out, as I showed you in that group home, right? So I then took that, which I loved, and I used it in my early years as a therapist, and it was absolutely the greatest gift I've ever learned, I think, in life. I took that and I kind of put my own spin on it, and I called that the calm technique. So there's 4 things, these 4 pillars that you're going to do. The first one is connect. And I mean literally connect. Put your phone down. Look at the person. Gaze into the person's eyes. Make sure they know you're available, you're present, you're showing up. And also in the sense that you're not ready to put your own agenda out there. If you're just getting someone to listen so you can get your point in, then you're operating from a place of fear and you've lost the connection. And right?
Everybody can see that from a mile away.
Absolutely.
We all know who's listening to just wait to chime in.
Yeah.
Or we can all see who's not listening, even though it's like, I'm listening. You often see parents sometimes do this with kids.
Yep.
I don't have kids yet, but I can remember being a kid and going through that myself with some adults. And it's interesting because, to riff off of that a little bit, because I know you're going through.
Yeah.
It's interesting that when we are so fixated on our story, and it could be hurt, resentment, whatever it might be with another person, we actually don't want to connect.
Yep.
We don't want to look at them in the eye. We don't want to listen to them.
Yep.
We
want to drive our agenda.
We want to drive our agenda. Or even if we're being quiet and we're looking like we're listening, we don't want to do things that actually would lead to a deeper connection with somebody.
Yes, that's a very, very good point. So there's a lot to this first part, right? So, and it's even the thoughts that you're thinking in your head, you want to kind of quiet those and start really being present and thinking about what the person in front of you is telling you. Right. And if you're a parent, you take your agenda, don't you talk to me that way. And why would you do that to your brother? And you just take it and you park it. You get to bring it back. It's actually incredibly important. You are, your child's frontal lobe, essentially. Right. So you get to bring it back. But that connection is huge. The other thing I always say is you want to connect with your higher self. And that's sort of what we were talking about. If you're fear-based, if you want to control the person, if you want to change the person, if you want that person to feel better so you can feel better, it's not going to work. That's not going to be authentic, right? So
the brute force approach.
100%. And so what you want to do is connect with yourself. What does my softest heart think here, right? How can I listen with my heart, literally? And that's brain-heart coherence, right? How can I be present with this person? And there's a whole bunch of things that need to happen and we can break it down. But once you've done that, then you go on to the next step. So this is A. This is the affect matching. This is where the look on your face needs to match, not exactly, but close enough, the person that you're talking to. right? So if they're really angry and they're intense, you want to be, listening with this look on your face so that neurologically the mirror neuron cells in the brain register that and then cortisol starts to drop, right? Oxytocin starts to flow, which is the hormone / neurotransmitter that flows when you're in connection. And oxytocin does unbelievable things in the body. It blocks and inhibits cortisol. It strengthens the immune system. That's super important in our world right now. It speeds up neuroplasticity. These are huge. It's free. You don't need a prescription. There's no negative side effects for it. And you get the same bounce back, right? So when you speak to another person this way and you are engaging this way, they will then engage that way with you and you'll get all of those same amazing biochemical benefits.
And it's not to say that if somebody's angry at you, you're not trying to be angry back to mirror them. You're actually just showing them that you're really... You get it. You get it. Like
yes.
You're taking the severity of the situation.
Yep.
You understand that
Urgency.
You're talking about something urgent, important, even if you don't have the same opinions as them.
You do not have to agree.
You are there. You're not dismissing them by giving them a crossed look, right? With your arms crossed and your sort of face looking at them like you're kind of crazy.
Yeah.
And you are not sort of overly happy. Like you're not overly anything. You're actually just, if you were there and you genuinely had concern for what somebody was saying, what would you do? How would you listen to them for somebody that you care about?
It's like I call it the best friend response, right? When you're talking to a best friend and they're complaining about something, you're not going, well, what was your part in it? And are you sure it went that way? And, these hard things can teach you things. Like you would never talk to your best friend. Like, you go, what? Are you kidding me? Seriously? That's what he said. It's that kind of genuine response. Now, you don't have to agree. It's not about agreeing. It's about getting, right? I say it's sort of like if someone's wearing a sweater and you say, oh, that's a really nice sweater. It looks great. And then you try it on. You're like, oh, this sweater really does feel good. Here's your sweater back. You don't have to keep it. It doesn't have to be about you. And you're not getting angry if you're not angry. You're not the one that's angry. They're the one that's angry. And you understand and you're present with them in that moment. And really reflecting that back. We'll do some examples actually in a minute, but
yeah. And I want to say one thing about that is
that
I've always focused on like listening and like connecting.
Yep.
But because I tend to be a little bit more stoic in in just who I am, I've had to like get better at like, okay, maybe I like, oh my gosh, like that happened to you. Like that doesn't really feel like it's tough for me, but I do it with my eyes.
You do it with your eyes.
Oh, so I do it with my eyes.
That's
and people
important.
Still feel that.
Here's what's important about that, Dhru. If you're faking it, oh, really? And you're thinking, this is not me. You don't have to turn yourself into someone else, right? But you can do it with urgency. You can do it by clarifying, what? Seriously? He did this?
Right.
It is really, you have to still be who you are. And it doesn't matter. If you're faking it, it won't work.
Of course.
There's no way they'll be like, what? What are you doing? You don't talk like that, right? So that's what I mean by sort of letting it in as well. When it's truly genuine, it will come out the way your body is comfortable expressing it and will be authentic.
And everybody who's listening is naturally doing this anyway, whether you realize it or not. Mm-hmm. It's more about tapping into that power, especially when it comes to creating empathy and connection with another person so that you can get to a place of trust and naturally, whatever is the best thing to happen next ends up happening.
Yeah. It usually flows from, if you can calm your agenda down, I need to teach this person something. I need to fix it. They need to leave this conversation better than they came. I need to give them something that's usable. That may happen, but that's actually not what the person wants. Most often, they just want you to be there with them, to just join them in that moment, right?
And it's funny you mention that because that, there's a new book about dopamine. I'm forgetting about the title.
I know the book you mean too. It'll come to both of us at some point.
And then another expert, it might have been the same author, was on a buddy of mine, Andrew Huberman's podcast. And they were talking about how the need to want to like push an agenda, like the resistance, again, let's even take like politically. One person believes a particular way, you believe a particular way.
Yep.
The need to go in and sort of correct someone and that feeling of you're gearing up to tell somebody how it is, that is often a stronger release of dopamine than something like positive happening in your life. Yep. So we in this place where people feel so addicted
to
want to come in and actually let me tell you how it is actually. right? Let me tell you about this. Let me tell you about that aspect. Let me tell you about this aspect. Yeah. And there's part of us that's addicted to that way of chiming in. But the challenge is, forget about for a second whether you have a fair point or not a fair point. When have we ever listened to anybody who's just come in and just told us how it is that we don't trust? Yeah. Never.
And the minute someone says, let me tell you how it is, you've already lost the person. Like they've already shut off. They're already going to get defensive, right? So even in a conversation that's more genuine than that, like I really want this person to think I'm a great listener. I really want to do a good job listening. You're already operating from fear, right? The minute your agenda is driving the conversation, you're going to lose part of it. So there's a lot of kind of just surrendering. This conversation is going to go how it goes. I just need to be present with this person. I don't need to come up with a solution. I don't have to say anything brilliant. I just need to be present. And Heinz Kohut, who founded self-psychology, his belief, and he was right, is certainly as a therapist, your job is to just be a sounding board often and reflecting back the accurate feelings and emotions. And then what happens is the person goes, oh, well, that doesn't sound quite right. And it's kind of the third time I've said that. And watch what happens. They'll start to figure it out themselves, right? Because you're just present in that moment. This is particularly true for spouses, for children, for best friends. Like you really just drop the agenda. Just be brave enough to be present and do it with your heart. I've told this story before, but one of my favorite little clients that I see, I asked him, I often check in with the kids that I work with because I often work with the parents at the same time. And I said, how do you think your parents are doing? They're really working on listening. They're really working on understanding your feelings. And he said, well, it's funny you say that because I think my mom's been listening with her heart. And I thought, that's it. You're listening with your heart, not your head, right? Easier said than done, but so powerful when you can do it. So powerful.
Yeah. Again, going back to what you said earlier, if we allow, it will happen naturally.
Yes.
But then the question is always, what's the blockage in between?
Yeah.
So we were going through, and I think we hit the C and we hit the A.
We hit the A, so now we're at the L.
Yep.
So L is where you listen and then you get to choose your words. And you listen first because what you say is far less important than how you say it, first of all. And the words are much less important than the affect. Right? So then after you've done all that, now you're listening. So you can paraphrase. You can say what the person said back to you with a little twist. You can summarize. Oh my God, are you kidding me? That's exactly what happened last week when you went into the whatever, right? You can clarify. So what part of that, when did that first start to go wrong for you? Pick a detail, right? So people who are not super comfortable with being kind of overly affect-based, you can sort of pick a detail. But urgency, right? Like you're picking a particular part of the conversation. That also makes oxytocin flow. You can wonder out loud. This is mostly for people that you're closest with. So let's say your spouse comes home and they start yelling at you about something and they're telling you about something that happened today, but you know that something else just happened in their lives. They just got fired or they had a big fight with their mom or something else happened. You can listen and then you say, you know what, I wonder also if the fact that just happened or that terrible thing just happened is also part of this today. And then you'll often get tears. Yeah, that's what it is, right? And when you're doing this in a genuine way, you'll know because there's nodding, right? Mm-hmm. There's leaning in and there's like, yeah, and you'll see evidence on the person's face and in their body that you're making that connection that you literally feel in your heart. You're both in alignment now. When you're off, they're going to say no, and you don't know. That's not it. You're not listening. They'll literally tell you, you're not listening to me. That's not what I said. And it's usually when our agenda starts to slip in too early. And then the final thing is M, that's the mirroring. So when you've pulled all of those things together, you've had a good mirroring moment that you've shared that is literally like dropping a pebble in the water and the rings go out. That person is then going to feel better. You're going to feel better. They've learned something. They may have a different interaction with someone else that day or later that day. And it just becomes part of this beautiful rhythm of how we start to communicate with each other.
When it all comes together, it's so simple, but yet it's something that's, because it's so simple, it's just so easily to overlook. Yeah. We forget the power that the calm technique. And again, people are already doing this, right? There's relationships in your life where you are doing this naturally. Mm-hmm. This isn't something that is completely foreign. Yeah. And that's the best That's the best teachings that are there. It's like, hey, look, you're already doing this.
Yep.
I'm highlighting it for you. I'm just helping you tap into it a little bit more because there's certain areas of your life, your relationship, with your partner, your boyfriend, your spouse, your girlfriend, your whatever it might be, your kids. That's a big one. We chatted about it earlier.
Yeah.
Your team, if you're an employer or if you work somewhere, you and your boss, your team, somebody reports to you, your social structures that are there. If you take the areas where it's repeatedly butting of heads that are there, it's that we've forgotten. And it's usually because there's a big blockage in the way, a story, some resentment, some resistance that is not allowing us or is in a way dehumanizing another person, right? Oh, okay, this works and this can work for somebody who gets it, but this person, let me tell you about Becky, let me tell you about, Tim, let me tell you about this other person. They're just not capable of getting there. They're the problem. And so we never even give them the opportunity.
Yeah, that's a really important thing that we have to, honestly, sometimes the person you least feel like doing this with is the person that needs it the most. And that's certainly true with your children, right? And that's a pretty profound thing to know.
Let's talk about a couple areas where you also see this showing up. You gave that perfect example of kids, right? Let's chat about relationships a little bit. Again, because you work with families. You don't particularly necessarily work with couples. I mean, it naturally comes
sometimes.
up.
Yeah, sometimes. It does. Yeah.
So what are some common dynamics that you see for couples in the classic sort of, men are from Mars, women are from Venus, all that other stuff that's there?
Yes.
What are some classic examples of where there's a breakdown? And really they're missing that structure of the content.
Okay, so this is a really good one and people will recognize this. So I guess the first part that I want to kind of start with is that we tend to polarize, right? So we tend to choose people that are quite different from us most often. And we do that because they will naturally complement us. And if you have good communication and you trust each other, you're going to be an awesome team. If you don't have good communication and you start to struggle and you sort of focus your time on trying to turn the other person into a version of you, that's where you're going to start going off the road. So that polarizing happens a lot with parenting. So it kind of looks like this. Like one parent is usually softer, a little more gentle, worried about, they're tired, they're hungry, they're having a hard time, looking for what's behind the behavior. Because behavior is not a thing. Behavior is not the problem. It's the symptom of the problem, almost always. And that's not just true with kids. That's everyone. And so they're looking at what's going on behind the behavior. And they tend to be a little softer and a little more gentle. And then the natural opposite to that is the other parent, which is often the dad, but not always. This is ridiculous. These kids are out of control. We need to do something. They're running the house. How are they going to have skills, to be an adult? And then what happens is the tougher parent has to get tougher because there's not enough rules being set. The softer parent has to get softer because the tougher parent is being too tough. And then you end up becoming a caricature. You end up being literally propelled away from each other. And then momentum grows because the stronger the opposition is, the stronger you have to be to oppose it, right? So now it becomes more intense on both sides. Kids are also smart, so they figure it out. They can figure out pretty quickly, oh, mom and dad are fighting over this. I can start a little trouble here and then I can back out and no one's going to look at my behavior. They're going to end up focused on each other. So that polarizing happens a lot. And then it gets into the storytelling. How does that fit in with who you were and how your childhood was? How does that fit in with those implicit beliefs that I was talking about that are already there? And so what I find happens often, there's a few different dynamics. The mom often will start over-functioning for everybody, right? Just sort of running the show and...
Just let me do this.
I'll just do it.
I'll just do it. It's fine.
Yeah.
Don't worry.
Yes, exactly. And then this is a really important part. I'm going to divert for a second, but the stories in our head become really profoundly important here. So as you move through your day and you're like, of course nobody put the dishes in the sink. Why would they do that? Because I'm the one who does it and I'm the only one. And you're sort of doing this kind of ranting thing either out loud in your head or out loud with your voice, or you're doing it inside your head, but it's chronic and you're in the shower, I'm going to tell him and I can't believe they did this. And we're literally living in this story. Now, what's important is the frontal lobe knows that it's not happening, but the midbrain doesn't. The midbrain thinks you're in trouble. It thinks your village is being attacked. It thinks some wild animal is going to attack you. Your cortisol levels are high. Your adrenaline is through the roof. You're constantly living in this state of reliving the argument. And
because that perceived threat is just as real.
Whether you're imagining it, remembering it, or in it. That's the truth, right? So you keep acting this out, and then you go to lunch. And you tell your girlfriends, can you believe it? And they do this, and it's this ranting kind of thing. And you can do a little bit of that. That's venting. That's okay. That's okay to do some of it. But if you live there in your head all the time, you are constantly now in a state of fight or flight. And whoever walks into that room and asks you for a glass of water is going to get it, right? Because you're in a different state. So this is very important. And this can happen to both couples. So the other one one overfunctions and does everything, or if anyone else does something, the family's not good enough, so they do it again, right? So the other one's like, well, what am I going to do it for? She's just going to do it again for me, or she's going to tell me that's wrong. I'm getting in trouble anyway, whether I do it or I don't do it. So maybe I just won't do it, right? So one couple ends up feeling misunderstood, not appreciated, taken advantage of, and the other person feels they're on the periphery. They're not given any respect. They're undermined. They're treated like a child. And that's, first of all, not great for intimacy. That's not great for your sex life, right? That's not cute on either side. And the further away you get from each other. And the other thing that's important is children are watching. They're watching, right? They're watching these conversations. They're watching whether or not they're being resolved. They can hear you especially when you're talking out loud about each other. And so we're teaching our children what relationships look like. So that's a really common one, or one overfunctions, one underfunctions. And that can play out in all kinds of different ways.
It's funny, you were talking about the stories that people have and how they continue it throughout the day. And even in the shower, in the car. Yeah. I saw this meme like 2 years ago, and it was a person taking a shower, and there was a bunch of there's an encyclopedia behind them. And the book said, basically fictitious arguments that I've won in the shower volume 1 through 10.
That's so true, though. How often do we do that? In our cars. That's the other place where we love to have arguments.
Totally. Yeah. The beautiful thing is that a little bit of that peace and space allows us, but if we use that space to just continue a story, it drives us deeper. And then we don't get to see how we were a part in it, or actually how do we actually create a resolution.
Yes, that's the important part, is if you stay there, if you get stuck there, it's no longer a strategy. It's no longer a tool. Venting for a few minutes and then moving on is fine. But getting stuck there is a problem, because then the reticular activation system lights up and only sees those flaws in your partner. Your body constantly thinks you're in that argument day and night, and you wake up with a pit in your stomach and you go to sleep with a pit in your stomach. And even when there's good moments, you won't let them in because it doesn't fit your story. You have a big drawer for all the things your spouse doesn't do right, and then you have a little bitty one for the things that they do right. There's nowhere to put them. You can't file it, so it just goes to junk, right? So one of the things you can do that's really helpful, and I mentioned it before, is start looking for the times when your spouse does do something nice for you, does do something kind, and they're there. They are there. It's just you're not pulling them into your awareness. And it's really challenging, that story. So in the middle of that ranting, you have to allow yourself to do it, and then you have to stop. And then you have to think about something neutral. It's not easy to do because we like our story. You talked about it a minute ago, that dopamine thing. That happens in the shower when you're fighting and winning that argument with yourself, right? So you're constantly getting that hit all the way through. And it's interesting about anger. You cannot be angry for more than 90 seconds, biologically. So you're angry for 90 seconds. That's just about enough time to start a battle, run away, throw a spear, or whatever it is that you have to do. After 90 seconds, it's a choice. So you start thinking about it again. I can't believe it. And you reenact it, and now you're mad again. And then you reenact it, and you're mad again, and you're mad again, and you're mad again, right? And then that affects all the relationships in your life, with your children, with your friends, with everyone, because you're up to here all the time with that level of stress. So part of it is, and this is so hard, we don't want to admit this to ourselves. We really don't. But the truth is, those stories keep fueling your reality. And if that's what you're focused on, that's what you'll see. It's truly that simple. And so start tagging something else, or at least think about something neutral. Think about something else. listen to something else, listen to a podcast, do something else, list 5 things in your life that you appreciate. Do whatever you can to pull your brain away from that stuckness, which is quite addictive, actually.
It's so addictive that it's almost like gratitude. And, you're a big fan of this, and
Yes.
you teach parents how to do it with their kids and highlight it in a notebook and read it
Yes.
at the end of the night. And, there's often this philosophy in sort of the world of relationship coaching and counseling, which is like, the happiest, couples have a 5-to-1 ratio, for every one negative thing interaction, there's going to be 5 positive ones that are there.
Yep.
But in a way, so much of this is true because when we are up to here and how we see the world, and we're so clear that that's the way that it is very hard to see anything else that's not that.
Very hard to see.
And so
anything
you
else.
cannot acknowledge the joy and the beauty that's there.
Yes.
You don't compliment your partner on that thing that they do for you every morning that's still special and beautiful, like they like making the bed and you like to make the coffee, but still that's great because you don't like to make the bed and you stopped thanking them for that.
Yep.
And
That's so true.
when you miss that, you miss so much of the joy and the beauty in life.
You do. And if that's the story you tell, even if you end up moving on, right? This marriage is over, I'm going to have a new partner. If you don't fix those stories, they will show up again in your next relationship. And if you're being really honest with yourself, it's probably showing up in other relationships.
Wherever you go, there you are.
Wherever you go, there you are. Yep.
And it's a big reason why one of the best lessons in people's life is not just not getting what they want, but getting what they want, and then realizing that didn't change anything.
Yep.
I thought it was my work. I thought it was my boss that was the problem of it. And sure, there might have been a little bit of a problem in it. Then you go start somewhere else, and those patterns continue.
Yep.
And that pain and that suffering is one of the best teachers in life. If we're open to it, if we're open to seeing that the smoke detector is screaming for a reason because there's fire somewhere.
Yeah. That is so true. That piece of it is where freedom lies, right? And it's real. It's where true happiness actually lies. And it's in every story. It's in every book. It's in every ancient text. It's in The Wizard of Oz. It's in Star Wars. You can look for it. It's over and over again. You're the hero in the story. The only one who's going to come and save you is you. And that's the truth. And we hear it over and over again, but it's absolutely the truth. And when I have couples come into my office, and it's kind of funny because they literally always come in truly believing that I am going to tell their partner how wrong they are. And you're going to hear it from a professional. And they sort of sit there like, okay, what is the story? You're going to validate what I'm thinking. And that's never going to work. And that never is the reason, right? It's always, if you want to change your partner, change yourself. That's the truth. If you don't like the behavior that your partner has, look inward. Relationships are an inside job. It's the truth. And it usually starts with your relationship with you. And people don't love to hear that, right? And that's what part of the ranting is. When we do this ranting thing, we're literally going like, are you going to let this happen? Like, does nobody else see how unfair this is? Is somebody going to do something? But nobody is. You're going to do something. That's who's going to do something. You're going to save you. No one's going to save you.
It seems that one of the reasons and one of those blockages that are there that prevent us from taking that path is that it's scary to give up our problems.
It is.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
It is. Well, and there's a few reasons why. One, the midbrain tells us that by focusing on that problem, that's the only thing that's kept us alive. Right? If I take my eye off that thing that could leap at me, I'm going to die. So, and this comes into the addictive part of it as well, right? So your midbrain does not know what's going on. It just knows that you rant and you're still alive. Therefore, this thing must be keeping me safe, right? It's the frontal lobe that's able to mitigate that. It's the frontal lobe that goes, hey, wait a second. This is happening here, and it's happening here, and it's still happening here. What's the common denominator? What can I do? What's my lesson? What's my role? Right? And you have to kind of pull yourself out of that very primal safety system that activates. The addiction piece is another. That's a very powerful thing. People have a very hard time letting go of their story because it feels good to rant. And anger especially feels better than sadness, right? Anger, of all of the what we call negative emotions, anxiety probably feels the best, right? It's much easier to feel angry than sad or angry than afraid, right?
There's also this question that people have is that who would I be if I didn't have my problems?
Yeah, that comes back.
Who would I be? What do I know on the other side?
Yes.
If you grew up and your only sense, even on a practical level, is that You know, you think of your parents as being in love, and in love meant they fought, you know, all the time, or they had this particular type of conflict, but that was just because they were passionate and they were in love, or that, you know, if you think that, that's all you know.
That's right.
And and sometimes people don't know what's on the opposite side of things.
And they're scared to know, because as terrible as a state can be, the brain doesn't like to change states, right? I'll take this state because it's familiar. I don't know what's going to happen if I shift states, but you also don't have to leap, right? It doesn't have to be this massive jump to, oh, I'm going to think differently and everything's going to be different. You can practice it. It's a practice. Do it for 5 minutes a day, right? 5 minutes a day, try to think about positive things. For a few minutes a day, just set smaller goals for yourself. I'm going to notice 5 things about my spouse today. Or I'm going to go to work and I'm going to find 2 things about my coworker that I actually like. Or as soon as I think about something that's unpleasant, I'm going to spend a few minutes thinking about something neutral, right? And as soon as you shift your thinking, the vibration in your body changes. Your biochemical signature changes, right? And as soon as that changes, your body goes, okay. So just stretch that out. You don't have to go all the way from completely miserable and ranting to loving your life. That's a big leap. That's a big state change. But time is going to pass anyway. So do something every single day that causes you to challenge yourself and shake the pattern up a little bit and grow new neural pathways. And most of it is about, honestly, it's about learning to think about neutral things, or what I call the next best feeling thought, something that just feels a little better than the thought you had before, right?
It's actually, and it takes work to do that.
It does.
But that's another form of that's like a meditation. It's a concentration on something.
Absolutely.
I often think of like gratitude is meditation for your prefrontal cortex, because it's natural that life's happenings can take over, and we tend to remember, because of the negativity bias, we tend to remember things that are negative. Everybody remembers, we just had the 20th anniversary. If you were alive on September 11th and you were probably older than the age of, 8.
Yep.
Everybody remembers where they were.
Exactly.
Because that gets rooted in our brain. It's a negative experience. It's a painful experience. It's a scary experience. Your brain wants to remember that. And so that it hopefully, could protect itself or others from that pain and experiencing in the future. And so because we have this negativity bias, we actually have to take time, because we'll forget the good things that happen. We forget the amazing things that take place. I did a gratitude workshop earlier in the year at the halfway year mark for my podcast. And I said, we tend to, and again, explaining out the basics on the negativity bias, we tend to focus on what either hasn't happened that we wanted, or the negative stuff that's happened. And then when we are encountering a new challenge in our life that we want to do, like we want to launch a new business, but maybe we've never done it before, we forget that there's so many things and areas in our life where we've demonstrated we had strength, and if we keep on showing up. So let's practice this. Let's practice. And I had 3 questions. The first question that I said is, so you're reflecting back on the quarter or the year. And the first question was, what's something tough, no matter how big or small, something tough that you accomplished that you're proud of? Because we tend to not pat ourselves on the back.
Oh, it's true.
Right? What's the rewards? What's the journal that you have with the wins journal with the kids?
The accomplishment book.
Accomplishment book, right? And you do this with kids. I was just listening to your episode that you had on this. Is that kids forget how capable they are, and adults also forget how capable they are. Second question was, who's someone that went out of their way, no matter how big or small, for you? They did something nice for you. Who's someone? Because when we often think that the world is against us, or we don't have enough support, or that we feel like we're lonely, or things aren't going the way we want to, we forget that kind gesture. We forget that time that somebody, paid for our coffee or gave us that mentorship call, and it completely changed the trajectory of our life.
Absolutely.
Right? And the last one is, who's someone that you did something for?
That's a good one.
Because along the same vein is that there's so many people that are so hard on themselves. And they are constantly comparing themselves, and comparing is wired into our DNA.
It is.
It was wired into our survival, just like remembering negative experiences are. So we were meant to compare to make sure that we had enough, that our people had enough, and we're always looking around to make sure everything's there. It's just that now we have so many inputs of comparison, And if you want to go doom scrolling and looking for them all, you can find them all.
You can.
And that doesn't necessarily mean that those people are any happier or any more satisfied with their life.
Yep.
So these are just, it's just nothing special. It's just an opportunity to meditate on and train your frontal lobe on there's actually good things that are taking place.
It's so true. You would not go to the gym, do 2 sit-ups and wonder why you don't have abs, right? It's the same thing. You want to grow these neural pathways. You want to grow these new habits of thinking. And it takes time. It doesn't take as much time as you think it's going to take. And you start to see the results. You start to feel the results really quickly. But it is a practice. It really is. And it's something you have to be mindful of every day. And it's keeping that frontal lobe on, right? And having it mitigate the safety system in the brain. We're literally walking around in, I forget who said this, but it's brilliant, in virtual reality suits. That's what our body is. We take energy, we take vibration, and we interpret it. We interpret reality. And that is true. But we get to decide what we focus on. We get to decide what we think about. We get to decide where our energy flows. And where thoughts go, energy flows.
So for you, in terms of actually making this a habit, and I know you've been practicing this for years, you teach this for years, but just as important for you to practice it, right? The whole,
every day.
The shoemaker's son has no shoes type thing, right? It's so important to live it. How have you found for you that it is so integrated into your life or your world that you don't have to like think about it, right? Like you've sort of habit stacked, or you've placed it into your life and your routine with other people or yourself individually, that it's just now part of your life. Yeah. Like brushing your teeth.
The calm technique for sure is, I mean, there's moments where my own teenage daughter can trigger me a bit and I'll get off track and I'll go back and I'll repair. But for the most part, and I can teach it and I can be in front of a whole group of people and do examples of that. I don't have to think about so much. And that's what I want people to know, that as you practice this, it will become natural. It's more of a way of being. It's more of a philosophy than a strategy, right? And you can approach everything this way. The one strategy I've learned to do recently that I've been practicing, though, that helps me a lot, is when I have a negative emotion of any kind, I go towards it instead of away from it. And I've become acutely aware, both as a therapist and also watching as people are struggling in some really difficult times, and also knowing myself. So if I'm feeling worried about one of my kids, or I'm stressed about whatever's going on in my life, I literally put my hand on my heart, I close my eyes, and I go directly into that emotion. Okay, fear, thank you. Thank you, anxiety. You're always coming out swinging for me. You're always coming out like full force. I love that about you. I appreciate that you do that for me. Thank you. I love you for it. But I'm actually okay in this moment. I don't need you right now.
And you'll say that out loud.
I'll say it out loud.
And you said recently, this is something you've been doing recently. Yep. Give us the contrast. What would you do before?
Probably like spin out and be up half the night and think about all the things that are wrong.
Just in your head.
Could go
it's
wrong.
Running around.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then, often very common to wake up in the middle of the night, not be able to get back to sleep. And now I use this strategy where I go towards the fear. I welcome it. I thank it. It's information. It's important. Sadness is another one. Let yourself feel it. This is what it means to be human. Like, these emotions are part of what make us who we are. And we can't have the good stuff without the bad stuff. And what's so interesting is when you go directly, let's say, into the sadness, it's okay to feel sad. This is how sadness feels. This is how a mother feels when. This is how a human being feels when. This is how it feels to think something's going to happen and it doesn't. And honor that feeling and go towards it. It will metabolize. It will melt away. And after a few minutes, you find yourself thinking about something else. It's amazing. It is, I can't even remember. It's part of it is heart math, like brain-heart coherence. And there's a few things that I heard together, and somehow it came out in my brain this way. And I teach the people that I work with and my clients and the kids that I work with to do it. It is the opposite of what we often do. We want to I'm feeling this. I don't want to think about it. I got to do something. I got to find a solution. But actually just calming down and turning around and walking right towards it can be very, very powerful.
Do you think at all that your upbringing and unique experiences that you had and the loss of your brother and how your parents kind of, treated you and you not feeling seen and that leading to like a people pleasing. So that's how you get seen.
Yeah.
Do you think that at all plays into the not allowing yourself previously to maybe fully feel the emotions?
Oh, without a doubt. There's no question. But I would also say that is, on top of that, such a human thing, right? It's emotions, especially intense emotions, are very uncomfortable in the body, particularly anxiety, right? Anxiety is particularly awful and stressful and it's one of the most difficult experiences to feel. Sadness is also very hard. So yes, for sure, that and I have to be aware of that, right? And I have to allow myself and know that I'm good enough and I am worthy of feeling those feelings and I'm allowed to feel those things. And I want to say too, like, and this is where the story, and my parents were actually really lovely. And after they got over my brother, they were very much there for me. But my story kept saying in some ways that they weren't. That's the piece that's so interesting. And if I look back with my adult eyes and my frontal lobe, I can see that. But it imprinted at such a delicate time for me. And I wouldn't do it any other way. Obviously I would want my brother to be okay. But I also know that that's something that has helped me with my work. And it's helped me be exactly who I am. And so I think part of it is accepting and understanding when things happen to you that they come in some weird packages and some difficult packages, and trauma is never an easy thing. But it's what you decide to do with it, right? Who am I going to be now? How am I going to be my best self anyway? And I think the greatest gift you can give yourself is to allow yourself to feel what you feel. And often people get, especially in this wonderful world where there's spirituality and all these great teachings, and what I find happening is a lot of people are just meaner to themselves now. I should know better, and I read this book, and I've learned how to do this, and I've done my breath work, and why am I still doing this? And you get so mad at yourself. But that's exactly what happens when you don't go inward, right? It has to be, I'm going to allow myself, okay, so I'm back here again. So my theme song's playing again. Here it is, but not with judgment. Not with you, idiot, you should know better. It's okay, here it is. It's back, and that's okay. The most important thing, Dhru, is using the calm technique on yourself, right? That's the most important
because
thing.
Some people are addicted to beating themselves up. If you look at the science of self-compassion,
yes.
We've had on Dr. Kristen Neff, who's one of the leaders in this space that's there, is that, there's a reason why we love picking on ourselves.
Yeah.
There is even a weird little dopamine hit that we get from telling ourselves that we're wrong, that we should have known better.
Yep.
And we beat ourselves up, and we're worse to ourselves than anybody would ever speak to us.
We would never speak to other people the way we speak to ourselves often. And that's the part that needs to stop. That's the voice that we need to start to silence. And I know we're running out of time, but I have one strategy that I think is really helpful. And this really speaks to not being enough and your self-esteem. And just think of it like a bank account. Right. So you're, I don't know, you got minus $80,000 in your bank account. So if you give yourself a few kudos and you try to, compliment yourself and be kind to yourself, you're not going to notice it. Not for a really long time, because there's no difference between being at minus 80,000 and minus 40,000. You're not going to feel it. But if you keep saying to yourself, okay, that was nice of me. That was really sweet of me. I like how I did that. That was so nice of me to let that person in. The smallest things. It doesn't have to be, oh, I won an award. That was really a nice moment. I was a good human being in that moment. I like how I handled that. Just keep making deposits and making deposits and making deposits. What will start to happen is you'll get to zero, right? And once you get to zero, when you start to compliment yourself, you're going to be like, yeah, that was really cool of me. You're going to start to feel it. And so being your own best friend and really solidly being aligned with your true self, with your best self, who by the way, will never agree with you when you beat yourself up. Never. Your ego is what gets nasty. That higher self, that wisest, most connected part of yourself won't go there with you. That's why you feel so awful. It's not the thing that's happening to you. It's not the person that's doing that to you. It's you being in such disagreement, such a gap between what you know is where your integrity is, where love is, and where you find yourself in the present moment.
It's so important. And I think that the component that is there that you shared that I want to just touch on a little bit before we close up is the calm technique on yourself. Mm-hmm. How is that different than, let's say, you're doing it with somebody else?
Yep.
And just reiterate again why it's so important and when somebody would do it.
Sure. So let's say you just got in a horrible argument with your spouse, okay? And you go upstairs and you're doing that ranting thing again. So while you're ranting, you literally either out loud or in your head say, of course you're going to feel that way. You worked so hard. You were the one who cleaned the cold kitchen and he came in and said this. Actually validate first that that's okay to feel that way.
Yeah, but talk to yourself like yourself is kind of like a different person a little bit.
Like it's your best friend. If your best friend came and said that to you, what would you say? Right? And say that out loud and actually match the affect with yourself and really summarize and say, yeah, I do feel like this a lot of the time, and allow yourself to just feel nurtured and listened to and understood. And then do the part that I talked about where you literally go into yourself and go, okay, this is how it feels to feel like people are taking advantage of you. And this is what it feels like to feel like nobody appreciates you again, and honor that feeling and go right into it and sit with it for a minute. Then take a breath. So you've done the whole calm technique. You've done in the middle part, you've sort of connected with that feeling. Then take a breath and start to think about, okay, can I think of one neutral thought? Can I think of something else that's going to take me away from that ugly thought that I just had, or that space that I'm in? Or go look at photo albums, or look at pictures on your phone, or listen to a piece of music, or go outside, look at the clouds in the sky. Do something, and then your brain's going to go, what are you doing? What are you doing? You should be back here thinking about this thing. And then you go back again, you do it for a second, and then you spend a longer time thinking about something else. You think, and then you do something else, then you find another neutral thought, and you just keep in play with yourself. You keep doing that until what happens is you'll get to a place where you can nurture yourself, listen to yourself, acknowledge yourself, metabolize that, literally just alchemize it into something else, move on to something neutral, and then suddenly be in a better mood without even realizing it. And then you can look for 5 nice things that your spouse does. Or then you can think about your colleague in a different way and challenge yourself. Or even acknowledge
yourself and say, hey, Dhru, you did the best you could.
Yep.
Yeah, okay, you want to create more here, but let's look at these aspects, right? You handled this situation.
Yes.
You did this. I find that as a transitionary moment, especially when I'm by myself, walking is kind of like my go-to.
Yeah, me too.
Especially with the whole science around EMDR and eye lateral movements that are there, and the research that goes in, when we're walking, we're making forward progress, and that naturally starts to relax the vagal nerve.
Absolutely.
And we feel like, okay, look, no matter what happened, you are literally kind of walking away from your problems just temporarily to give a little bit of space around things.
The brain just wants you to run. It just wants you to go. And so walking, a lot of people run also when they're upset. They go on a jog, they go on a run.
I hate
But moving forward though is actually really important. And if you can't, you can do it in your mind.
Yeah.
Right? And just having those different habits and loving yourself. And after that, that's when you can say, okay, what's my lesson?
Right. Because you're basically saying if you're not in a neutral state, if we have not de-escalated a little bit,
you're just going to beat yourself up if you ask. Or you won't be able to ask those really difficult questions. How does this serve me? Is this true? Right? And who am I without this? Those are really important questions. That's higher order thinking. That's the magnificence of the human brain. But you can't do that until you've self-parented your way to that.
Yeah, your brain is like a detective. If you believe a story, I'm a failure, it's on a mission to look for that. And then toxic positivity is trying to brute force squash that with, I'm amazing, I'm good enough, I'm this, I'm that. It's too big of a jump. Not saying that there might not be some elements of that could work, but you're just not in a receptive space.
No. And then you get mad at yourself for not being able to keep it.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
It's a whole little system. It's so straightforward, but so it complicated. Works.
I know, but it works. It really does. And humans are messy, but this actually really, if you can make this a lifestyle, if you can make this something that you love yourself enough to do, you will change your life, truly.
This was fantastic.
Thank you.
I can't even believe that the time just flew by just like that.
It always
feels
does
like we just sat down and started to talk about it. You work, as I mentioned earlier, you have a whole system and methodology and a group of things that you do. Now even a podcast.
Yes.
Since I think the last time that you came on, the podcast is new. So take us through a little bit of the world. Let's start with the podcast.
Sure.
People love this conversation. I think the podcast is a natural next leap that's there. Perfect. They can continue and then you're there in your world.
Yep.
What is it, and walk us through it?
Okay, so I have 2 podcasts. I have the Connected Parenting podcast, which really talks about a lot of the things we did today, all things parenting. I take parents through the calm technique and also, bedtimes angry teens and all kinds of stuff. And we have a lot of fun. It's wonderful. I enjoy it. And that's wherever you can find your podcast. And I try to do it weekly, but it doesn't really turn out weekly. I try to do it as much as I can. I have another podcast called the Mental Health Comedy podcast, so I host that along with Ed Krasnick, who's a comedian, and we interview well-known celebrities and entertainers about mental health. About their mental health, about anxiety, about worries, about depression. And comedians are brilliant, amazing people, but they often carry that brain that can see all the amazing intricacies in life and be brilliant enough to find what's funny can also turn on you. And there can be a shadow of that. We've had some fantastic guests, and that is very much strategy based. So I make sure in every episode I give people tools. Like, we can talk a lot about mental health and the importance of mental health, and that's important, but I actually give people tools. It's literally, here's what to do. Try this. So there are exercises. So those are two ways that people can dive deeper into this.
I love it. So that's content. There's also books that are out there. We'll come back to them.
Yep.
But I really think, especially, last year I was talking to you in the beginning, I was like, I bet in a very unfortunate and fortunate way that you guys exist. Like, this has probably been a big year for business.
So busy.
So many families are struggling.
Yep.
So many kids are struggling.
Yes.
And there's parents that are listening here and are hearing these examples, and with school closures and other stuff and just people trying to navigate this new world that we're in, people are looking for support.
Sure.
So you have a whole team that works with families.
Yeah, we have a big team. And we work with kids directly. So we have people who just do pediatric work. And we do very different therapy with kids. We make sure it's fun. If they love Star Wars, it's all about Star Wars. If it's Harry Potter, it's all about Harry Potter. If they want to go science, we go science. We tailor it so every child has a magical experience and feels really safe and loved. Zoe, my daughter, is one on the pediatric team and works with kids. And then we have a bunch of other people who do it. And it's wonderful. And then there's also a bunch of us that work just with the parents and really supporting parents through this journey of parenting, which is hard. We specialize with, in gifted kids who are super bright, and kids that have ADHD, or kids that I call gladiators. Just sassy, feisty, no, why would I do that when I can do this? Kids who are going to make great CEOs, like great adults, but just their feelings are too big to fit in their little bodies. And those are our favorite kind of kids. So, and the connected parenting method works on all kids. If your child doesn't fit in that category and you just want some really solid science-based, it's the neurobiology of love, really, connected parenting. It works on all kids, but it's especially effective with the sassier, feistier kids where, you read all the parenting books and it works well on your other kids, but not on that kid. That's where we really come in, I think.
And the beautiful thing, this all happens over like the web.
Yes.
Right? They don't need to necessarily come in and see you guys in person.
No, we can, depending on what city people are in, but we work with families from all over the world. So that's our team. And then we have online courses. So I have a teen course and a connected parenting kids course where I basically go through the curriculum with you. It's all recorded. It's all online. It's on demand. And you can either just watch the videos, or you can join and work with me once a month, where I do online coaching calls, which are amazingly fun, with families literally from every corner of the globe, all saying the same things about their kids, which is pretty amazing. And it's a really supportive community. So,
That's beautiful. And here's something super unique. You have this role play playground.
Yes.
Membership for parents.
Yeah.
Talk to us about what that is.
So it's actually delightful. So it's a membership where you pay for the month and you get to go to 4 different sessions. There's always at least 2 connected parenting practitioners on the call. And parents join and they practice the calm technique and they exchange roles. And, one will be the kid and then one is the parent and one's having a meltdown. And if it doesn't work, if you're not doing the calm technique properly or as efficiently as you could, you're going to see the person escalate. And in this loving, joyful way, our team helps people get better and better at this technique, which takes practice. It's not so easy. And then the parents just support each other and help each other. They're all parents of really challenging, amazing, smart, funny gladiator kids. And it's just a really lovely place to feel supported and learn.
I love it. And it's a low cost entry. It's like $49.
That's why we did it. Therapy's expensive and the courses, not everybody can afford that. And we wanted to have a place where people can really learn. And our belief always at Connected Parenting is if you can't figure this out in your own house, how are we going to do it as a planet? How are we going to do it as a community, as a country, as a city? So it gives you the confidence to make your home life and just go as well as you possibly can, or as well as it possibly can, and just feel confident and it's lovely. It really works. It's a beautiful place to practice.
Hey, YouTube, if you liked this interview with Jennifer Kolari and you want to go deeper, check out this podcast with Peter Crone on how to redesign the subconscious mind.
So it's the freedom that is, I think, our birthright, our true nature, our inherent state. When we disassociate from the